Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her vexation, when at the first he lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations.
Good morning. Welcome to Line by Line Bible Studies. Continuing today in Genesis chapter 49. We're just about at the end. But I think we're going to have at least another week here because we've got some significant passages to talk about. Significant in the sense of they bear significant analysis. You can have very significant things said that are pretty much thou shalt not kill, though we can analyze that, right? Whosoever is angry with his brother. So you just never know. It depends. Chapter 49, verse 1. And Jacob called unto his sons and said, Gather yourselves together, that I may tell you that which shall befall you in the last days. Gather yourselves together and hear, ye sons of Jacob, and hearken unto Israel your father. Reuben, thou art my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, and the excellency of power. Unstable as water, thou shalt not excel, because thou wentest up to thy father's bed, then thou defilest it. He went up to my couch. Simon and Levi are brethren. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitations. O my soul, come not thou into their secret. Unto their assembly mine honor, be not thou united. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they dig down a wall. Cursed be their anger, for it was fierce, and their wrath, for it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob, and scatter them in Israel. Judah, thou art he whom thy brethren shall praise. Thy hand shall be in the neck of thine enemies. Thy father's children shall bow down before thee. Judah is a lion's whelp. For the prey, my son, thou art gone up. He stooped down. He couched as a lion, as an old lion. Who shall rouse him up? The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, until Shiloh come. And unto him shall the gathering of the people be, binding his foal unto the vine, and his ass's colt to the choice vine. He washed his garments in wine, and his clothes in the blood of grapes. His eyes shall be red with wine, and his teeth white with milk. Zebulun shall dwell at the haven of the sea, and he shall be for an haven of ships. His border shall be unto Zidon. Issachar is a strong ass couching down between two burdens. And he saw that rest was good, and the land that it was pleasant, and he bowed his shoulder to bear, and became a servant unto tribute. Dan shall judge his people, as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan shall be a serpent by the way, an adder in the path, that biteth the horse's heels, so that his rider shall fall backward. I have waited for thy salvation, O Lord. Gad, a troop shall overcome him. but he shall overcome at the last. Out of Asher his bread shall be fat, and shall yield royal dainties. Naphtali is a hind let loose, he giveth goodly words. Joseph is a fruitful bough, even a fruitful bough by a well, whose branches run over a wall. The archers have sorely grieved him, and shot at him, and hated him. But his bow abode in strength, and the arms of his hands were made strong by the hands of the mighty God of Jacob. From thence is the shepherd, the stone of Israel. Even by God of thy father, who shall help thee, and by the Almighty, who shall bless thee with blessings of heaven above, blessings of the deep that lieth under, blessings of the breasts and of the womb. The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of... The blessings of thy father have prevailed above the blessings of my progenitors, unto the utmost bound of the everlasting hills. They shall be on the head of Joseph, and on the crown of the head of him that was separate from his brethren. Benjamin shall raven as a wolf. In the morning he shall devour the prey, and at night he shall divide the spoil. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is that their father spake to them, and blessed them. Every one according to his blessing he blessed them. And he charged them and said unto them, I am to be gathered unto my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave that is in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave that is in the field of Machpelah, which is before Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham bought with the field of Ephron the Hittite for a possession of a burying place. There they buried Abraham and Sarah his wife. There they buried Isaac and Rebekah his wife. And there I buried Leah. The purchase of the field, of the cave that is therein, was from the children of Heth. And when Jacob had made an end of commanding his sons, he gathered up his feet into the bed, and yielded up the ghost, and was gathered to his people. So, we have Jacob's, you could say, prophecy of his sons. What shall befall you in the last days? The last days, I wonder if that's the proper phrasing of it, because I want to say, well, I don't, the idea of the last days also has the implication of the latter days. And, okay, there we are in that part. So let's look. Oh, we're still in Titus. Okay, let's just go Genesis 49. So much faster than on my phone. In the last days. The last. Days are going to be a familiar word. We're not going to need to look up. Familiar to me anyways. Definition, the after part, the end. A place. Yeah, see, latter part, or actual close, according to context, meaning at the, like, what befell him at the last? That's what it, I mean. What your end shall be. So, I mean, in some, because I don't want to take away from the idea that this could be a prophecy merely of the end of their individual lives. Not merely, of course, because I don't believe that. I mean, I don't believe the scriptures would be given for a merely, personal prophecy. A lot of times people say, hey, when you interpret Isaiah, Paul, or Ezekiel, how do you justify applying something like Ezekiel 28 to someone other than the prince of Tyre, to whom it was directed. Or, Isaiah chapter 13 and 14, it's directed at the king of Babylon. Why do people begin to talk about Satan? What, the King James says Lucifer, but we know that's not what the Hebrew text says. It doesn't say, technically it sort of does say Lucifer, if you understand what Lucifer means. It means light bringer. Jesus, who's the bringer of light? Who's the real bringer of light? Who is the real morning star? Because light bringer actually also is translated morning star, which some people find offensive because they say, well, that's what they call Jesus. That's the point. Satan himself is disguised as an angel of light. What do you think that term Antichrist? Well, I don't like the term Antichrist because it has Christ in it. You're cutting yourself off from knowledge by by that kind of thinking. So, what I would say is, this is the same principle. Well, I do think, and the reason I bring it up is because it's helpful. You should think of it first as a prophecy about the man Reuben. Like if we start with the first one, right? A prophecy is a prophecy of the end times. That's going to be a bit more obscure. Now, that's not to say that there might be some insight there. There could be. Because in all the examples of the Bible, we can always derive insight. And that's often the point. I'm not saying that Ezekiel 28 isn't about the Prince of Tyre, or that Isaiah 14 isn't about the king of Babylon. No. I'm saying it's primarily about the king of Babylon, but the king of Babylon is an example, a type, and that's why he's being prophesied about. And that lesson can be extrapolated and applied because there's nothing new under the sun to a certain extent. Many of the mechanisms of human action that worked in the past work the same now. God hasn't changed. So the way he's going to deal with certain situations is not going to be any different either. And so when you see similar situations arising, you can pretty much you already know exactly what the response of the Lord would be if you know the word. When you see things that look like the mark of the beast, you shouldn't participate. You shouldn't. Well, is that really the mark of the beast? Does it really matter? It's like, it's like, well, going to a strip club isn't really going to a prostitute. It's not real adultery. Yeah, I know it's not really adultery, but you know what? It's like, you don't know that that's wrong. So it's a lot like it, isn't it? Yeah, it's a lot like it. It doesn't have to be the actual thing to be actually dangerous and to be actually sinful. Oh, I got on that page. Last or end. See, that's the thing. It's like the last or the end. The end of days for them. The end of days for us. The end of days for all humanity. Is that what he refers to? Well, we can think about it on all those different levels. There's nothing wrong with that. We take the lessons of the past. We understand them for our own lives, and we also apply them to the future. The thing is, the utility of such a prophecy, right? What's the utility of a prophecy about Reuben that's about the end times? To me, if I knew I was of the tribe of Reuben, I would pay particular heed to that. I wouldn't want to be caught up in some weird sexual sins. In the end times, if I was of the tribe of Reuben, I'd want to be redeemed. And that may sound a bit too much like, it may not sound like such a Christian perspective. And in a sense, it's not. It's not meant to be. From a Christian perspective, all the curses, all those things that bind people are not to be even considered. You have a set path in Christ. Your salvation is already assured. And you merely live out the dictates that Christ has spoken into your life. It's not by works by any means. But people are condemned because of the things they do, Meaning those who do not obtain salvation, they don't have faith, and they also do lots of evil things that make them responsible and that bring them down ultimately. Okay, so Jacob calls his sons, And I will tell you the things which shall befall you in the last day. What's going to happen in the end days? Not like I said. He might mean I'm leaving and I'm going to be gone. And I've made certain observations about all of you. And I'm going to tell you what I think. As a man of God, what's going to happen? He brings them around, all of them, to hear this. It's pretty remarkable, too, because he's pretty savage. Because he doesn't have only nice things to say. There's not a lot of negativity. There's some positive things, some things that are sort of neutral, right? And Reuben is there a prime example, right? We start with Reuben, the eldest son. You are my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, the excellency of power. Whenever I thought in terms of my firstborn, these verses would come to mind. As far as, I've told my kids, it's an interesting thing, because they'll observe how I'm a bit softer on the later kids. I'm older. My temper isn't as short. I've learned more patience. I've had more kids. I'm more experienced. I do more things to prevent them getting on my nerves, so I'm just not the same person I was. I'm glad. I'm a better dad in many ways. But from their perspective, they're a bit nostalgic for the old dad, the old hard-edged, the one they remember fondly and with trembling, a little bit, a little bit more, right? I was never that much of a terror, really, but but there's the other side of that too, is I was also younger, more energetic. I did much more. I was much more hands-on with my little ones. There were no older siblings to play with my eldest, so I was I was a much bigger figure in his life. Much more of my strength and my youth went into my older children. They got the first of me and the best of me in many ways. In many ways, not in every way. There's a trade-off. It's like I'm not the young and vibrant man I once was, but I'm a wiser older father. There's benefits to that. You lose things too, at least from me. Like I said, my youngest, he has all kinds of older siblings that are a blessing to him, and they play with him and they have interactions, and that's good. But I'm not the same father I once was, and I never will be. I'll just be a grandfather from now on out, because it's like I was younger. I was more vigorous. That's it. It was the excellency of power, excellency of dignity. When I was at my, in some ways, when I look at it in the sense of like, if I lacked more humility back then, I was more dignified, perhaps. I don't know. That's a joke that probably only makes me laugh. I don't know if it makes sense. I'm not going to try to explain it, okay? I just want to look up dignity, what the word was in Hebrew. Exaltation. Seith. Sa'ith. It's like a double syllable thing. See I don't know. Phonetic spelling. Looks like sa'ith. Exaltation, dignity, swelling. That's the general idea. An exaltation. Look, I have an exaltation on my arm. I have an exaltation here. It's something that goes up, right? That could be like the idea of, also has the idea of being accepted, an elevation or leprous scab, figuratively elation or cheerfulness, exaltation in rank or character. It could have the sense of character and rank. Point is, the excellency of, well, what I would say is I wonder how you get excellency, right? Is it a doubling of that? I'm just curious on the linguistic sense, because where's excellency? Let's see. There's probably something going on. If I had my companion Bible, it would probably tell me there was something. The beginning of my strength, Rashith, own, that's like vigor or strength. Well, excellency of dignity. Yether, Seth, Yether, power. And excellency is like the abundance of dignity, abundance of power. That's what the excellency means. It's like the idea of abundance. And so yeah, and there is that, and there's the exaltation of youth. There is that, and you do, and so whatever. So hey, my first shot at it, when I was still the youngest and the best of myself. Well, it's like I would never say this about my own son, okay? Because he's absolutely not unstable as water. Not my firstborn. Not any of mine that I know of. I mean, because they haven't all grown up yet. But I don't have any that I would say are unstable as water. That's not. But yeah, unfortunately, that's what Jacob turns to with his firstborn son. He came out unstable as water. And here's the thing. On some level, I try to, one of the things that humbles me is I understand it's like when you raise kids, it's easy to just blame the parents if the kids go wrong, right? But that depends on what you think about going wrong. You know what I mean? It's like sometimes parents only have themselves to blame because of certain kinds of problems with kids. I say when I can't it's not my responsibility even to make sure their life turns out good for that. Life is something each person needs to make for themselves ultimately, and they should be chaperoned towards that, towards making their own decisions and towards making their own life. I mean, prepared for it, and I'm not in a rush to make them have. At 18 they gotta be ready for all that. It depends on the kid. In my opinion, it's like they're not all ready at 18, but you want to push to help them to foster industriousness and creativity and all sorts of good qualities. But you have somewhat. It's not all nurture. One of the things I thought that I could clearly pin as a parental thing. Your relationship with your children going into the future is somewhat under your control. You can have a good one in the sense of positive, or, good relationship is a weird way to describe things because it depends on what your perspective on relationships are. For some people, good relations means beneficial to me. Like, I don't care about you. I have a good relationship if, like, you do all kinds of things for me. You pay for things for me. You take me places. You spend money. Oh, that's a good relationship. I take. No, that's not, but because that can foster resentment and all kinds of other things, right? If you have a relationship with your children where they want to have interactions with you that you've created a sense of affection and loyalty, what do you want out of what kind of and these are the kind of things you have to think about. What do you want out of this relationship? Because what you do, the way you interact with them will foster different kinds of things. You can foster disobedience. You can foster, but the thing is, it's only the nurture effect is limited to some degree. Because obviously sometimes there are children that are so unruly that no amount of parental discipline. I question this a lot. I'm a little bit skeptical on that front. I do think that, I wouldn't want to be tested with a child that was already half raised. And that's why I say though I'm very skeptical of the idea that you can't raise kids right, that some kids can't be raised right because they're just too rebellious, too this, too that. With a bit of understanding, I think an extremely rebellious child can be made to heal. Because you get at the root of why they're rebelling. The idea that there's just like rebellion period. Yeah, there's a bit of rebellion period. I feel a bit of rebellion period sometimes. Just like when someone starts telling me what's what and to do and in all this, I start feeling a little bit rebellious. Yes, sir. But and sometimes you don't want to completely crush that either. I don't. I try to foster it sometimes. During the pandemic, I was teaching my children how to be rebellious and why. encouraging it. I didn't force them to do the things I do, you know. But neither did I, you know, I certainly didn't force them to do the things that everyone else told them to do. Not me. Anyway, so I do think nature has something to do with it, but I do think that, you know, I tend to have a feeling that, you know, just like as the Lord, there's no one who is totally out of the reach of the Lord. Now, the Lord may not reach out to all, not to the degree that they would accept him. You know, I mean, you could say that in some ways God reaches out to all. To all have heard the voice, all have heard the call. True, but not with ears to hear. I mean, that's also true. They may have heard something, but they didn't hear it the way we heard it. So I always feel like everyone is in the reach of God. Everyone is in the reach of turning from their sins. So nature, nurture, yeah. But there can be much more challenging kids than others, right? And so I don't rank my children as particularly challenging. That's why I think I had such good results, as they weren't particularly challenging. They are not without challenge, you know, I mean, and I've tried to meet the challenge at every turn, but I don't think that they were, I had really rebellious children. I never felt that, you know. I mean, there were moments when they were rebellious, but that was, I don't want to say quashed, but it was like dealt with as appropriate, depending on the appropriateness of the, you know, what were they rebelling against? Because sometimes, you know, provoke not your children to wrath. They may be rebelling at the fact of, like, there may be something genuinely, they may have a genuine grief that should be addressed. Should not be assumed that the things that grieve them are without merit at every turn. They're not always. They could be very, they might be very reasonable. I don't want to be characterized as unstable as water, right? Unstable as water. These as, you know, what did it describe as roaring waves of the sea foaming out their own shame? There's another one. You know, on Christ the solid rock I stand. Now, water has a positive symbolism, but it's not used of that in here. See, there you see, it's like there's not a universal application of symbolism. Like whenever you hear water, it's like, oh, unstable is Jesus. You know, no, not in this sense, because water is not, you know, sometimes the water represents peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. Sometimes the water represents the Spirit of God and the life that is given us through that. But sometimes it represents chaos. Like in the beginning of Genesis, you know, the Spirit of God moved upon the face of the waters. Water is something you can't rely on. You know, water is something that is kind of insidious. It seeps in and it drips. It gets, you know, you get a little crack and the water gets in, and it slowly works its way in. A little crack in a foundation can slowly split a building. A little crack in a stone will slowly, as the water gets in there and it freezes and just a little bit. And over time, it can destroy things. Water rusts. It causes instability in metals. It's an oxidizing agent, you know what I mean? And so water can be disruptive. The waters of a flood, the chaos of the swirling floods and the abyss, the unknown, the darkness. You know, that can all be that. And there are qualities of that which we do not want to take on. You don't want to take on that unreliability. You know, you want to be reliable. That's one thing that'll make your kid ruin your relationship with your kids. Is like you being unstable and unreliable, like not showing up to pick them up when they need to be picked up. I mean, occasionally everyone sometimes is late or makes a mistake. You know what I mean? But you should be there when you're supposed to be there. Or, you know, as a parent, well, you know, sometimes you look at your kids, they grow up and you realize they're not stable. I'm glad I can't say that about it. I have no complaints. All my adult children please me, you know, and you know, I don't inquire often of whether I please them or people or whatever. They seem pleased with me. That I don't hear complaints, and when there have been problems, they've come to me. Something about the way he said, "Thou shalt not excel." I mean, this is a pretty stark, brutal prophecy on your firstborn. You're not going to do well. You're not going to excel. Why? Because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. When he says he went up into my couch, I imagine him turning to everyone and saying, "He went up to my couch." Not much of a blessing. You're my firstborn, my might, the beginning of my strength, the excellency of dignity, the excellency of power. Water can be very powerful. It can be very, it can be all those things. But if it doesn't have moral stability, if you can't know, you know what I mean? If you had there are some borders some lines that you can't cross, or they reveal something about your character so corrupt. It's not that you can't be saved, but it's like, who can trust you? If you go into your own father's bed, it's not his mother. Granted, that's good. It's not as perverse as all that, but it's still bad. And his father has multiple wives. Okay, granted. This is would be like a stepmother, right? Not exactly. Probably not. Probably doesn't have a mother relationship with his father's concubine. Doesn't have, and the concubines only had the few children that Jacob gave them. He may not be giving that. So I understand the dynamics here. But it's inappropriate. When I was young, my dad always communicated to me a sense that, that my brother and I shouldn't be in competition over females ever. And I would certainly think that's obvious. It should be considered like a hard barrier to, I would never consider dating a girl that my brother had dated. This is even before I knew God. I mean, I knew God sort of, but before I really was serious about God, let's say. I say knew God. It's like I barely know him today. But I thought I knew God, sure, but I didn't. And I certainly was not, mindful of the things I should have been mindful of. But anyways, I knew that. And so there are certain boundaries that if we're willing to break, that renders us so unreliable that what else can you say about someone? He's a mother effer. His brother's mother he's been sleeping with. It is too much in the family relationship. It can't be. And you make a mess out of everything when you cross those lines. And someone who doesn't socially understand that is never going to do well. If you can't control yourself to the extent you can just stay out of, your father's affairs or your brother's affair, your brother's wife, anybody's wife, really. But your father's own wife, as it said in the New Testament, that a man should have his father's wife. Paul was talking about in Corinthians. It's the proverbial. It's the proverbial. This is absolutely unacceptable. But to some people, they might think, well, why not? Because on some technical level, it's like, well, she's not related. It's like, I almost spoke as I was like, Stunad. No. Some things are forbidden, and if you can't get like that, you gotta understand, we say we're all sinners, but we gotta keep it back, especially because we have committed ourselves to Christ. We are not just other people. We are the children of Abraham. In this case, we are the children of Abraham and Isaac. We have a God we serve. We don't carry idols around, or we don't anymore. And so this alone is enough to say you're not, sorry, you're not going to do well. The later part's not going to be better than the earlier part. You're unreliable. You're unstable. Not solid. Not a solid guy. Do me a solid. Oh, I didn't mean that. Right? He's not that kind of guy. No, unfortunately. You like your firstborn to be a very solid guy. And I think, that kind of boundary crossing is somewhat, it's got to be deep in the heart, that kind of transgressiveness. I don't know. Because it's like, I don't know. I like to trace things back to parenting and be able to try to say, like, well, if you do it this way, you can make them turn out better. I do think the way we parent our kids does have an effect on the way they turn out, for sure. And we can have a major effect on them that actually, prepares them for life in a way that gives them advantages going out into the world as opposed to disadvantages. An unreliable person like that is not going to do well at all anywhere. Even if people don't know about you, you will soon reveal yourself to be who you are, and it's not going to do you any good. Simeon and Levi are brethren. They are brothers. These are all brothers, but these are particular brothers. These brothers need to be talked about together. Instruments of cruelty are in their habitation. They hang out in the places where all the torture devices are hanging around, Simeon and Levi. Oh, my soul, my soul. Come not to their secret, unto their assembly. The inner part of there's a part like where they get together in their soul, in the essence of who they are, and the spirit of vengeance is in their councils, and the spirit of cruelty. I understand this a little bit. I generally am kind of a sensitive person to people's feelings and stuff like that. But when a certain lines are crossed, I jettison that stuff and become myself cruel. And I've observed it many times. I go from being like quite kind. I'm not a passive aggressive kind of person, but I go from being, I try to be unobtrusive, let's say, not so much passive as kind, but I tend to be kind and disposed to that by default, or at least to acting that way, right? To being outwardly that way, and will actually take a lot of frustration or insult, or put a certain amount and a certain kind. I'll take it on the chin, but I know where cruelty lies. I know where it is. As far as for me. So I understand, like, there's a certain pleasure that the cruel take in being cruel, in causing others pain. Because when you feel like you deserve it, and usually to get into that position where you want to be cruel, where you want to hurt someone, you have to sort of blind yourself to your own guilt. You have to sort of say, like, it feels so good to make you suffer for the wrong you did, and and not considering thyself. But for the grace of God, there go you. And that's why vengeance is reserved for the Lord, because He alone can exercise that kind of, you deserve it, and this has to be done. And it must be cruel, but does not take perverse pleasure in it. Because you almost have to take perverse pleasure in cruelty, because without the perverse pleasure to blind you, your conscience could perhaps be naked and open to the fact that you are no better than them, and therefore deserve no better, and are not really worthy to be exercising that kind of cruelty on someone and deriving pleasure from it. You know what I mean? From making them twist. You know, like I said, I'm not that cruel, but I have enough cruelty in me to understand how it works. Okay? Because I could imagine, I catch someone in the act of raping my wife. I could be very mean to that someone in the rage of my anger. And from that, I can extrapolate the feelings. And there are cruel people who feel that cold, man. They don't even need a rape in their family. They enjoy cruelty just for the small pleasure of it. And that's a rough sin to be saddled with, because God gives grace to the humble, resists the proud. And I'll tell you what, those who judge without mercy shall be judged without mercy. It does not go well for the cruel in the judgment, because you got to explain what the hell you think you're doing and why you think you're somehow better qualified to judge how much someone ought to suffer for their sins than you. Interesting, Levi is the priesthood. We do often suffer, I associate the officiousness of the priesthood and the officiousness of the bureaucracy and the officiousness of such people in their position of official power with the kind of cruelty and systemic menace that is inherent in all systemic things that men set up, like whether it be government that just grinds you up in the gears of its nobody gives a crap, when you're trying to deal with it, no one cares, I tell you what, I get a lot more response from government than I do from a lot of companies as far as finding people who cares. I've always, it sounds like an odd thing. I've always tried to stay straight with the IRS because you don't want problems with those people. And I've found them to be very helpful when you can get a real person. Whatever. And a lot of those people, I don't just say that because I don't want any trouble. It's true though. Because you want to avoid trouble, but also they can be very helpful. And why not? They don't have pressure for a lot of other things on them. I don't know. So I don't hate the tax collectors per se. I don't have a lot of taxes to pay because I've never been very wealthy. Never been anything like wealthy, except if you consider comparing me to someone living in the third world, in which case I look like a king and live like one, no doubt. As we all do, the poorest among us, if you discount the homeless, which you should, because those are people who are mentally ill. For chronically homeless people are definitely all mentally ill. They haven't just fallen on hard times. People who fall on hard times can find help and all that. But people who are on the street are drug addicted, and that, if that isn't a mental problem already, because some people manage their addiction and don't end up on the street, and obviously that's something that's gone off the rails. Anyways, we don't want to inhabit the places where the instruments of cruelty are. The things that cause people pain. It is easy sometimes. I'll tell you what. Sometimes I could almost be overtaken with misanthropy. The hatred. I just get fed up to about here with human beings. Because sometimes you just look at the state of man and you say, "Oh Lord, I'm surprised you haven't destroyed us all already. Why do you even bother watching this? Is this even? Is it?" Sometimes it can seem like you get to a perspective where you're just seeing the negative aspects of things, and it can start seeming like, what's the point of even living? It's understandable, because life can be cruel, and the things that happen can be hard to explain. But I have faith, that it is an explanation exists. And then in the midst of it, even, I think one thing, I expect one thing, but I do trust that the Lord is working all things together for my good, because I'm called according to his purpose, and I've put my trust in him. And so should you. But come not thou into their secret, unto their assembly. There is a secret place. like I said, where the secret, where people band together for cruelty. You know, they lay in wait because once you start using the habits of cruelty to enforce your will, it's hard to really go back to anything else. And it is. I don't think it's a prosperous way of running things. It has a way of working, but also a way of creating human misery. Interesting that assemblies are associated with the church and priesthood, right? Not that he's ripping Levi for being the priesthood, but Simeon and Levi take counsel, and he's like, I don't think I want any part of what they're planning. My soul should stay out of that secret. My honor, don't be united. I don't want to unite. See, my soul, he's connecting to something bigger about himself. It's not just, oh, my soul. It's like my soul represents who I really am. You know what I mean? Am I the kind of person that enters into the assemblies of the cruel? That sitteth in the seat of the scornful, so to speak? I don't want my soul to be tarnished with their cruelty. People always, and I get a bit revolted at people's, sometimes there's I see people get into, they're going out of the way to express themselves of how much they hate something. One of the common ones I'll see is people will be talking about, people who hurt kids, right? And I understand. Yes, it evokes a lot of emotion. And agreed, those who hurt kids deserve about as bad as you can imagine. But, it's meditating on that. There's no, it doesn't, there's no virtue in me being like, oh, those terrible pedophiles. I don't elevate myself. Almost everybody condemns that, except for the people themselves, right? I mean, all the normal people condemn that. That's not a virtue. You know what I mean? Oh, they raped our sister. Oh, that's them. They're real angry about stuff. Real angry about bad people. Oh, the wicked. Oh, we got to see them punish the wicked, the wicked, the wicked. But there is something sinful itself in their cruelty. There's something unacceptable about that period. That I don't want to tarnish my honor by associating with it. Because it leads to murder and destruction. What does that mean? They slew a man. Again, they killed a bunch of men, but why does it say a man? I can't think he's trying to give sort of a range. To dig down a wall is one of the is the process of laying siege. Once you've digged down the wall, well, you've entered the city. They've breached a city is essentially what that means, right? They breached a city. They killed a man. They breached a city. The sum of human evils. There's we're talking about maximum. What's the worst thing? Well, Jesus said the worst thing someone can do to you, there's nothing they can do to you that's worse, because they can kill you and they can't do any more to you because your soul, because you have eternal life. Now that's through Jesus Christ. But in the human experience of the way the things humans fear, what do they fear? They fear being killed or having one of their loved ones killed, right? Or what's the worst of all? Collapse of civilization, the nuclear Armageddon, whatever the equivalent of your city being overthrown and sacked. Your all your men slain and your women sold off into slavery. That's what digging down the wall represents. Okay, killing a man in a small way. Like Stalin said, he was wrong, but kill one man and it's a tragedy. Kill a 1,000 or 1,000,000 and it's a statistic. He was commenting cynically on the nature of things, but it is the question of killing a man and destroying a city. once you, that's what I mean about those line crossings. It's like, it's one thing you're angry. Jesus talked about being angry with your brother, what you say to your brother. You got to watch these things so you don't end up killing a man. But when you give yourself over to cruelty and anger, you start off killing people, and then pretty soon you're killing lots of people. Anger and cruelty leads to that. The desire for revenge upon one's enemies. That's why we're entering into a very cruel time, because the people who are trying to exalt themselves in society are all aggrieved in some way, or they claim to be aggrieved. It doesn't matter if the grief is actually real, because all they're doing is claiming that this is their excuse for cruelty and wrath. That they can go about destroying people's lives, or literally going around shooting them because of their aggrieved status as being somehow oppressed by the rest of society. That gives them license, they think, to go around hurting people. And this comes from every quarter, really, and this is kind of the story of every mass shooting, mass murder situation. Because they're not all mass shootings. There have been plenty of mass murders that go beyond shootings. There was the Christmas, what would you call it? The Christmas parade atrocity up in Wisconsin, where the guy drove through a Christmas parade, killing little kids and grandmas with a car, no gun involved. And certainly, people who are, if we literally evaporated all the guns in society, you would still, the most violent, repressed individuals who have this repressed violent urge in them because of whatever grief they think they've gotten from society, they wouldn't go away. And their murderous impulses would find other outlets. Maybe not as effective as a gun, but, and so there's that's an argument you can make. My argument is always like, people say, well, how many kids will you sacrifice for guns? I'm like, I need 1 million, I suppose, because we've already sacrificed, the generations that came before us made sacrifices to protect our freedoms. They sacrificed their lives and their wealth and all those things to obtain the freedoms we have now. So how many kids have to die for me to... all of them. There's no amount that I would care to give up my rights for. Yes, they might get shot because, and it's not my fault. It's because we refuse to treat the actual problem. Because it's, we have countries where they have lots of weapons. Afghanistan, we just left tons of weapons there. How many school shooters do you think they have in Afghanistan? And that's a weird place to compare things with, right? But it's not, obviously guns can make for good work as far as if you want to, mow people down, sure. But the point is, the trigger is pulled by some person who has decided they want to kill. And why we have people who are deciding that is a root cause problem that ought to be addressed. I don't know. I can't say that I know in every instance what makes people do such things, But I do know that it is a cruel instinct. How could you, because I think about, okay, what would it take for me? I'm pretty angry about things in society. I feel pretty upset about how things are going. What would it take for me to go do that? And I think to myself, well, I couldn't do that. Like if I were to think about, okay, let's act out violently. What would that look like? And it's like, well, it's like, I thought about things like, okay, well, what about, doing something to disrupt things without hurting people? I don't want to get too specific lest I could, right? Like things like in different, like people will do like roadblocks, or they'll do, that hurts people, but not physically. Or let's say, whatever, like what's the most extreme thing someone could do? They could destroy a monument, right? Or something like that, right? Let's say with hammers, not, they go at night and they just bust up some monument. Let's leave bombs out of it, right? And protest. They've destroyed something. That to me is less offensive, obviously, than hurting someone. People, that to me immediately I think like, well, what about their family? Why them? It's easier when you think about someone specific who's done something wrong, and you can focus. A lot of times people focus on an individual. But all this focusing on anger, it's just not healthy. And also, it does nothing to really change anything. You can kill all the bad people, but the spirit in the world, which is causing men to err, doesn't depart. It's just, you cut the head off and then 5 more sprout. It's a Hydra type situation. You can't lop heads off and expect it to fix the problem. And that's one of the reasons why the way of, I don't see any need for violence when you have the Word of God. And they will make violent. Certainly I think people have the right to defend themselves, and they should. Defend their families, and they should. But that's not what I'm talking about. It's like people think, well, I'm defending my society by going out on offense and breaking things and destroying them. That's not what we're called to. We're not called to cruelty. We're called to preach the gospel, to preach kindness, to pray for our enemies, if perhaps they might retrieve themselves from the snare of the devil, to do good to them, and perhaps thereby heaping coals of fire upon their head, And that should, heaping coals of fire on my enemy's head because I'm doing them good is all the cruelty I'm allowed. I'm allowed, like, that's a certain amount, there's something cruel in that. A little bit of, like I said, there's a bit of pleasure in your enemy's suffering. But if he's suffering because he's ashamed because you did him good when he did you evil, well, that's one time where you're allowed to feel a little bit of that pleasure. Because you also are, because that cruelty knows that he's not actually harmed by it. It's not actually hurting him. And so, what's so cruel? He's the anguish of his soul. Well, it's like all the anguish of my soul did me a lot of good over time. So, giving souls anguish through ideas is the only kind of, and again, careful with that. Because that's something that's still a powerful weapon that should be used on the wicked. Parents can do this to their children, cause them anguish with their words, grieve them, provoking them to wrath with only words. And you ruin your relationship, and they don't do what you want them to do in life. Parents, if you want your child, I want them to go do this. Well, then you got to inspire in them a desire to please you. A desire to do what you think that they want. You got to make them desire, unless you want, you could try to pressure them, but you run the risk. You run the risk of things not turning out well for them or you ruin your relationship. And again, is it well? It's tricky. Look, even Jacob, a man of God, who things didn't turn out well with all his kids. His first 3 he's gotten through, and they were all, one way or the other, really flawed. Very flawed. He curses their anger because of the fierceness thereof, their wrath, because it was cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. This is literally true of Levi. And it also gives us a clue that he's not just talking about the individual. How can you scatter Levi the individual? You would scatter his descendants through the priesthood. So that gives us some idea that while Jacob is talking about them as individuals, their individual characteristics are prophetic. Well, because this isn't all you could say about Simeon and Levi. They were bigger people than that. They weren't just about their cruelty. But the cruelty of Simeon and Levi would have the greatest resonance through history on those tribes. So that that's one way you could look at it, as saying, like, that's why this is prophetic of the tribes. Because it's not that, being someone's son can make you a bit of a hothead. That's part of nature. Sometimes parts of who we are, in my family, there's a lot of certain characteristics that people have. And they may be somewhat cultural. Some of them are inborn. Like when I was a little kid, a little like there's 8mm movies of me as a child. I'm trying to open a box, Christmas, and one of my older siblings tries to help me. This provokes wrath, anger, and violence from the young child. No one taught me that. That wrath, that anger, that violence is part of who I am at my nature. I mean, that was worked out of me through life and through upbringing. These impulses have to be learned. We all need to learn to control them. And so, when we don't, we come into our adulthood handicapped by some pretty significant sin. And that can impact all the society around us, so that their whole family, spread them out. You don't want concentrations of cruel people. But like I said, sometimes the that impulse, just because maybe you have a predisposition to, let's say, cruelty, it may be the sign of something inside that is not entirely bad. Having that sort of like a steely nerve to be able to do something, like I think of a surgeon who does something that is very difficult to do to someone that hurts them, but is also ultimately for their good. We need people with nerves of steel who can do the hard thing, who can say the hard thing, but not so cruelly. We got to be able to say the hard thing. We got to be able to do the difficult deed. We got to be able to punish the wicked. Yes, all those things need to be done. But there has to be limits. There have to be controls. We need to control our anger. We need to control our wrath. We need to bring it down and manage it at a level that's acceptable in the sight of God. And for them, their anger was fierce. Like I said, be angry and sin not. Right? There is such a thing as righteous indignation, but it is containerized. It has boundaries. You know what I mean? It's not unbridled wrath. There's no such thing in godliness. In godliness, all wrath is bridled completely and under control and being used and funneled towards a good purpose. That's what my music represents. All my feelings of wrath, my rage, all the things against the things that society is doing, it gets funneled down and moved down into a form that is not hurtful. That's ideally, right? We know in part. We do what we can in part according to what is revealed to us. I'm certainly not a perfect servant. So, anyway, so there we are, an hour done. We got through the first 3 sons. That's pretty good. That means before the end of the week, if we go 3 sons a day, we'll probably just do Judah tomorrow. We'll see. Again, I have no. I'm delighted to take my time here because I think there's a lot to be talked about here. I already feel like I'm rushing. So, anyways, I look forward to being back. Hopefully every day this week. Sometimes things happen. So, and also I should say the times, when I put up times, that's mostly a goal for me, not so much like a promise of it'll be at that time. I got to change my website too because there is no fixed time. But hopefully every day this week we'll see a study. Until tomorrow. Thank you then.
Nevertheless, the dimness shall not be such as was in her first. He lightly afflicted the land of Zebulun and the land of Naphtali, and afterward did more grievously afflict her by the way of the sea beyond Jordan, in Galilee of the nations.